Okay, well, welcome to our spot of tea and 250 years of history. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Teresa St. Angelo, the director of Winters Heritage House Museum. And for those of you who do know me and have come every weekend, you're sick of hearing it. I know. But anyway, we love having you. We love these programs. We're so excited. Roy and his wife met me, oh boy, I guess back in the
Winter,
yeah. And as soon as they started talking, I was like, yeah, you're in. You've got to present. So we are excited to have Roy and from the American Philosophical Society.
Library. We have a bunch of buildings.
Go ahead.
No, it was a bunch of buildings that we have in Philadelphia, and the Philosophical Society is the oldest learned society in America, founded by Franklin and John Bartram, and many members from around the world, scientists, diplomats, artists, you name them. Go on the website. There's a beautiful exhibit that's free next to Independence Hall in one of our buildings on unique copies of the Declaration. And you'll hear a little bit more about Lancaster and the Declaration printing a little bit later. But
very good, very good. Before I forget, every now and then I forget to announce something, and I did send it home to members. There's a trivia luncheon that's being sponsored between Winters Heritage House and the Elizabethtown Historical Society, and that is, I don't think I gave you the flyer on that. Yeah, we'll have to. That is June 28th. It's a Sunday from 1 to 3, and there are some prizes, and the trivia, you're not going to be working in teams. Somebody was like, some people were like, are you working in team? No, it's individual. And then there is a charge because we are providing the lunch. For Spot Deli is providing the lunch. And so I promised the Historical Society I would promote it today. So if you want to sign up, just call the museum. I know we have little flyers. I don't know where Marie put them. She'll be back and she'll tell me if you're interested at all. Oh, by the sign up. Okay, thanks, Linda. Okay. All right. So, sorry for that little plug.
No,
we want to get to the important fun stuff. So, with that, Roy Goodman.
Thank you. As you know, we're celebrating the 250th of the U.S., and back in 2006, we celebrated the 300th anniversary of Benjamin Franklin's birth, born in Boston in 1706, and lots of traveling exhibits were occurring at that point. Maybe some of you saw them not only in Philadelphia, but throughout the country and in Europe. The French put two together, beautiful exhibits, the English, the Italians. But anyway, at that point, Franklin and Marshall College, their art museum, the Phillips Museum, how many of you, show of hands, have ever been to F&M's Art Museum? Well, they, along with the Lancaster County Historical Society, wanted to do a tribute to Franklin. And the Von Hess Foundation, based in the Susanna Wright House at that time, now in Philadelphia, said, we have to do something. What can we do? It has to be sort of arty because that's what they do. Well, since most of the really rare things were circulating in these big exhibits around the world, around the U.S., I made a suggestion. I collect sort of Ben Franklin and advertising literature. Most of it is, some of it's rare, but it's unusual. And since Franklin really was an advertising gentleman, they liked that idea. It would appeal to young people. The students in F&M and the local schools brought many people in over that month-long stay there. And the Lancaster County Historical Society loved the idea because they could show all kinds of things relating to the civic issues in Lancaster, organizations and the like, that they could never get together, whether it's music or food, excuse me, food or wine or mechanical things, poetry. It was great. So I learned a lot about Franklin and his travels in these parts, and what I'm going to do today is review some of those things and share those things, but there are always new things to share. And of course, back in 2006, the technology wasn't nearly as good. Today we have the Franklin Papers published by Yale University. Take a guess at how many volumes they're up to. He dies in, you know when he dies, 1790? Well, they're up to about 1784 or so. They probably have another 5 volumes left to go, but there are over 45 volumes. I believe it's around 45 volumes. And people have questions about Franklin. You can go online, query the Franklin Papers, whether you want to know about Franklin in Italy, or Franklin and cigars, or you name it, Franklin and food, put a person's name in, you'll get a wonderful review, because people ask me, there's so much to learn from that. I may be sort of an expert, but Franklin was an incredible networker, and anybody has questions like that genealogical questions should look at that. Also, the Library of Congress has a website. They've digitized Franklin's papers, and that's pretty impressive, as well as many other founding fathers. And anyway, our exhibit was called Sense and Sensibility. And I say our exhibit, my wife Sherry is a designer and artist and helped put this exhibit together back in 2006. And we took it around the region and Princeton and Utah and various parts of it, traveled digitally. The Commonwealth, yes. It's actually a flip 2 exhibits. Commonwealth is about the collections that, more serious things at the Lancaster County Historical Society, and the other exhibit, the more informal, was at the Phillips Museum. Anyway, for most people, Benjamin Franklin's image is most noticeable on the $100 bill. In the American psyche, he represents many things and he appears everywhere. The self-made man with little formal education and plenty of sense and sensibility, retired at 42 to reemerge as a true Enlightenment figure. Franklin, the printer, diplomat, scientist, satirist, the man of many centuries, became an American brand. And that's what our exhibit was basically on. We collected all kinds of things from around the world with Franklin's image, and still do collect. We have 2 U-Haul lockers in Salonga or whatever, was that the town? Down there, Salonga, off of a new facility. And so many of our things are in storage. I did bring a few books and a few other things from the collection I thought you might find interesting. Hopefully we'll be able to bring more of those out. But as far as Lancaster goes, and what we call the Commonwealth, you see the $100 bill here, even the lottery tickets. Did you realize that Franklin was founder of the lottery here, a lottery? And he published the proceedings, the winners, in his Pennsylvania Gazette, and had his wife Debbie take care of handling the winners and losers and collecting the money. And at that time, the idea, lotteries, churches used lotteries, public resources used lotteries. You wanted to build a road, you might have a lottery. That's a good idea. Instead of asking taxpayers of a community to pay for sporting facilities, have a lottery. Of course, you'd need a lot of support to do that. But anyway, so here we have some lottery tickets with his image and the $100 bill. Now, Lancaster was one of only 4 counties in Pennsylvania when Franklin was elected clerk of the Colonial Assembly in 1738. He realized early on that communities would thrive and prosper with the promotion and nurturing of services by ordinary citizens in the local, regional, and provincial spheres. The establishment of a multitude of organizations supported by the economic and human resources of Pennsylvanians was a lifelong enterprise for Franklin. And here you see a parade hat, Lancaster's Union Fire Company, which was founded in 1760. I won't say it was modeled after Ben's organizations, his firefighting, but it was inspired in many places, did form fire brigades. And there was a whole insurance and community link to that as well. If anyone's interested, we can find you more information about that. But this hat was something the Lancaster County had in its collection and said, we've never shown this. Here's an opportunity to show this. It's great. And we have these flat hatchels, as they're called, used to process flax into linen, also from Lancaster a little bit later. Franklin was very much interested in agricultural things too. Of course, the primary activities in America, and for that matter in most places, was agricultural or domestic activities. And again, these are things that, of course, Franklin really had nothing to do with, but they could take them out of their collections and show people what 18th century craftspeople or farmers or woolen merchants would use. The foundation of Lancaster's community relied on agriculture, as I said, communication through the printing press and postal system, internal improvements encompassing the roads, bridges, and waterways, education and support for tradesmen and artisans, and public well-being provided by a militia, fire brigades, and the health of Lancaster's inhabitants. Those craftsmen also included instrument makers, and here we have a violin from early on, 1730s, used by a Lancaster musician. Franklin was very much interested in music too and enjoyed lots of things, particularly what we call today country and western type music. He liked those folk songs and wrote a few. When he was in Europe and went to various, well, let's say serious music, he wasn't always that keen on opera singers. He said they sounded like they belonged on a ladder going up and down, trilling their way through the performance. So that's just one of his ideas about music. A community for Franklin is fostered by more than basic needs of the people. Lancaster's religious and ethnic diversity provided a rich patchwork of organizations of art, music, literature, folklore, and traditions that Franklin disseminated through his newspaper, the Pennsylvania Gazette, and his printing of books in this community, often in the German language. Here we see a fracture taken from 1799 from Lancaster County, Conestoga Township. And at the bottom, a Franklin Institute certificate in their collection from a gentleman named Christian Metzler, who designed and produced reversible railroad lantern. And that's much later, 1885. But these ideas of giving back to these organizations was something he was very much interested in. The 1751 publication of Johann Arndt's, and forgive my German pronunciation, but Des Hochleiter Theologie, Sechs Bücher from wahren Christendom, is one of the monumental examples of the colonial German-American press. Franklin and local printer Johann Bohm collaborated on a number of books and pamphlets in German. Indian treaties held in Lancaster in 1744, 40, oops, going the wrong way. Oh, okay, wait, I'll go back there. 44, 48, 57, and 61 were printed by Franklin's Press in Philadelphia. His involvement with a number of Lancaster printers helped expand his business and assisted these young, ambitious artisans. Now, oh. Wow, that's good. There you go, the treaty. This was one of many treaties, as I mentioned, with Indians of the Six Nations, or the Iroquois, north of here, but in Virginia and Maryland as well. And he aimed to establish peaceful relations with Native American tribes. The treaty sought to secure land for colonial expansion and settlement. They were part of a broader strategy to mitigate conflict between settlers and indigenous peoples. And he emphasized, Franklin did, mutual benefits and trade agreements and negotiations. The treaties often resulted in the cessation of large tracts of land to the colonies. They reflected the changing dynamics of power and land ownership in colonial America. In fact, Franklin set up the first printing press in Lancaster in 1751. James Charton, sent by Franklin and succeeded by Samuel Holland and Henry Miller, printed the short-lived Lancaster Gazette. 31 numbers of the Gazette were printed before it ceased publication on June 5th, 1753. Now, Franklin was pretty successful with his business ventures. He wasn't too successful with this. That may have been because others didn't want him to spread his businesses to these parts, and there were up-and-coming printers that could do as good a job, or maybe a better job. And also, Franklin was concerned with people learning English. He didn't mind people speaking other languages. There were Native Americans, there were African Americans, there were lots of Dutch and Swedish speakers, even Italian and Latin speakers in these parts. But he thought everyone should learn English, and that was important to him. He was concerned with the German press, and could he keep up with the burgeoning population in the German areas of central Pennsylvania, and for that matter, in Philadelphia and in other parts of the colonies. But he had a network of many, many newspapers from the Caribbean to New England, Providence, to Boston, and he had many journeymen that he brought into that business, and many of them went off on their own, including this John Dunlap, who set up things in Lancaster, and later, in 1776, was the printer in Philadelphia of the Declaration. And so the Dunlap printing, maybe some of you have heard about that, but that was someone that trained with Franklin and one of his fellow artisans. He also journeyed to Lancaster in the spring of 1755 with the purpose of procuring wagons and horses for General Braddock's expedition to western Pennsylvania. The urgent need for these items was announced in a broadside printed by Franklin and widely distributed in the area. One might be amazed at the diversity of Franklin's network of correspondence. Susanna Wright, writer and frontierswoman, corresponded frequently with both Franklin and his wife Deborah on literary, agricultural, scientific, and civic topics. Susanna's brother James was also a Franklin correspondent. And Susanna is the daughter of people that run the John Wright House, the restaurant in Columbia. I'm sure many of you have been there. It's a wonderful place. And the Susanna Wright House is actually a very interesting place to visit as well. There will be an MV tour of that pretty soon, if those are interested. Franklin botanist John Bartram founded America's oldest learned society, the American Philosophical Society, in 1743. Its membership over the years included several learned men and women with ties to Lancaster. William Henry, master rifle maker, and experimenter in steam navigation. We'll get to this. I'll go back.
What you looking for?
The steam, well, it's actually published in this. This is the first volume of our transactions. And this was an idea of the Philosophical Society to gather information to help farmers and craftsmen, and also to give prizes, there we go, to people from around the country, around the world actually today. A man named Magellan, a common name I'm sure for you explorer fans, a descendant of the famous Magellan, gave Franklin money, quite a bit of money, to set up something called the Magellanic Premium, which is still given today. And while this Magellan was an inventor and a mover in Portugal, he actually settled later in England, I think for certain religious purposes or maybe philosophical purposes. But the Magellanic Premium is given out today, and just recently this prize was given to an astronomer, a woman astronomer whose work was very crucial in space exploration. So those models can be seen on the website of the APS. But in this volume, the transactions, there are all kinds of ideas for basically building a better mousetrap. And for those that want to look at this later, I'll leave it out and you can see the kinds of things they were talking about. Here we have the the magic squares. That was an idea he had, a mathematical game idea. He was always playing with these kinds of things, and I guess you could say Sudoku, along with chess, were among his favorite things to do. And of course, there were lots of other 18th century games that I don't know as much about. But he was a man very much interested in physical fitness, and and music. There's the glass harmonica. He's in the, what famous Hall of Fame? What Hall of Fame do you think Franklin would be in? Anyone take a guess? What did he do and like?
Inventor?
A Sports Hall of Fame, I should say. Yeah, he's in a Swimmer's Hall of Fame. He's credited with swim fins and wetsuits, and actually you may remember there was an early submarine called the Turtle, and that an image of that was published in this early volume of the Philosophical Society Transactions. So it's the oldest learned society, still publishing, and it's been digitized, of course, and you can look at those things online. In other areas of printing, we have these nature prints. You can see these objects, these leaf printings. He would use those on paper money that was printed. He thought that would be a good way to prevent counterfeiting. I mean, it would take somebody a long time to do the veins of a leaf on a particular document or paper money. What's that?
It says it would make it look cool in addition to permanent.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. It would. Peter Miller, prior of the Brotherhood of Zion of the Seventh-day Baptists at Ephrata, was well versed in music, history, methods of farming, and printing. An extract of Peter Miller's letter on the time of sowing peas so as to preserve the crop from being worm-eaten was published in this early American magazine, if you want to look at that later. That was, as I say, a forerunner of the transactions. He was a welcome guest of Franklin's house and perhaps one of the most pious members of the American Philosophical Society and a very active member of the Ephrata community. And here we have the extract of that for a machine for sowing peas. Notice how it's spelled, P-E-A-S-E, has preserved the crop from being worm-eaten. Well, that was an important thing. We don't like worms in our peas, do we?
What are you looking for?
I'm going forward. Well, botanist and Lutheran minister Gotthilf Henry Ernest Muhlenberg was another member of Franklin's American Philosophical Society scientific circle. His listing of 1,001 botanical specimens identified within a 3-mile radius of Lancaster was produced in 1791. 1787, he became the first president of Franklin College, and Franklin generously contributed 200 pounds cash paper towards the college's establishment. And these kinds of local things were of interest to everybody learning about the crops, and that Susanna Wright was very much interested in that as well. In September of 1785, after he returned to Philadelphia from his 9 years of diplomatic service in Paris, in October of 1785, he was elected to the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania. He was elected its president, the officer of governor, today, and on October 18th, he was unanimously reelected for the next 2 years. Franklin donated his salary to charity. These ties with area residents reflect a little-known facet of Benjamin Franklin's influence in Lancaster, Pennsylvania's largest inland city in the 18th century. His correspondence and publications open a window to an era that established Pennsylvania's commonwealth. And here we have his will. Oops. Yeah, there we go. This is in the collection of the Philosophical Society. It's actually owned by the city of Philadelphia. Does anyone have an idea of what Franklin left money for? And, well, that's a good guess. He didn't do it in this will. Take another guess.
Fire companies.
That's a good guess too, but no. In a sense, it could be, but not exactly. No, those were pretty much set up already. And he wanted to train young artisans, craftsmen. So he left money to Philadelphia, and quite a sum of money, and also to Boston, in his birthplace. And he thought that if you had a well-trained artisan group, it would really help the economy of Pennsylvania, and it did, of course. So in Pennsylvania, he said 200 years after his death, we'd re-examine where the money went and how to use it in the future. Well, in Philadelphia, what they wanted to use it for was a big party. They wanted to have Ben Vereen and Aretha Franklin get together and have a citywide party. And the people that were responsible for the distribution of this said, well, that's a nice idea, but don't use Franklin's money for it. So the money went to the Franklin Institute, which gave out all kinds of awards for inventions, trained people, and today, of course, we think of it more as a children's museum or a popular museum, but it's more than that. And they received quite a bit of money in 1990. That was after the 200 years. In Boston, they set up a Franklin Institute, which is still going, and they just put in $500 million to remove this Franklin Institute from one area of Boston, which was the wealthy inner city, not inner city, but the business area, and they rebuilt the campus. So they're still training people. But Franklin's money, Pennsylvania, was distributed to many, many different foundations in Pennsylvania. A lot of community foundations received that money, and even some of the money for the Penn State's College of Technology in Williamsport was a recipient of those funds. So if you have ideas, you could go to some of your community foundations and say, look, this is something that Franklin would have liked. Of course, you have to make sure they still have some of the funds left for that. And so here you see what he says. Let me just read this. The last will and testament of Benjamin Franklin, I, Benjamin Franklin of Philadelphia, printer, late minister, plenipotentiary from the United States of America to the court of France, now president of the state of Pennsylvania. So he was president, you see. Do make and declare my last will and testament as follows. To my son, William Franklin, late governor of the Jerseys, I give and devise all the land I hold or have a right to in the province of Nova Scotia. He didn't realize he had land up there. To hold to him his heirs and assign forever. I also give to him all my books and papers, which he has in his possession, and all debts standing against him on my account books. Basically saying to his son, you take care of all these outstanding debts. Willing that no payment for, not restitution of, the same be required of him by my executors. The part he acted against me in the late war, which is of public notoriety, will account for my leaving him no more of an estate he endeavored to deprive me of. And you see, that's a pretty nasty inclusion, a slap in the face to his son, who was a Tory and really not a very grateful son in that. But the son, does anyone know what happened to William Franklin? Well, he goes back to England and lives his life out there, and has an illegitimate son, who, by the way, William was also an illegitimate son. So there's sort of a group of illegitimate kids in the Franklin family. One of the saddest things in Franklin's life was not inoculating his little son, his infant son, Frankie. He thought about it, and he wanted to do it, but he never did it, and his 3-year-old son died of smallpox. That was something that he never got over. So in today's world, when we talk about inoculations and the like, think about Franklin, and whether you believe in inoculation or not so much a fan of that, think of his heartache when he didn't do that and the terrible thing happened. So speaking of the money that Franklin left, there are 2 books that I have up here, and I'm going to speak a little bit about those. Franklin's Last Bet, Benjamin Franklin's Last Bet. This is a recent book by a English professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and it talks about the money that he left and what Franklin really wanted to see happen and why he thought Pennsylvania was the prime place that should receive his funds and what Pennsylvanians would do with it. I would say of all the early colonies, Pennsylvania was the most productive. Of course, we're a little biased here. Any of you not from Pennsylvania originally? Where are you from?
New York.
Well, yeah, New York wasn't nearly, until they built the canal, the Erie Canal, wasn't nearly as industrious. Well, they might have been as industrious, but not as enterprising in some ways as Pennsylvania. And so in this book, he talks about how the will over years was neglected in Pennsylvania. And that's the sad thing. There were people that administered it, but Franklin said, I know when I give the money out, people will die and people will not renege, will default. But nonetheless, everyone should have a chance to start their own business. And in this book, a gentleman by the name of Bruce Yenowin did his dissertation at Syracuse University on the money that went to the recipients in Pennsylvania and in Boston and Philadelphia. And it was incredible because there were so much industry created, craftsmanship created by those funds. And I must say that I also received money from this will that Franklin left. You might say, I'm a librarian, that's not an artisan. Well, you had to be under a certain age, living and working in Philadelphia. And as a librarian, that's somewhat of a craft or information science person. So I received a low interest loan to buy a house in an area called Northern Liberties. That's only about 8 blocks north of where the Independence Hall is. And that area was run down. It was a very industrious area in its day, but of course with the moving of American industries and Philadelphia's loss of industry, Northern Liberties became more of a no zone in some ways. Things are coming back now. There are lots of artists that live there and lots of computer and tech kinds of people, nursing people moving in, and it's good to see the neighborhood very vibrant. It's just between Fishtown, if you know that part of Philadelphia, it's a more industrial area, and Old City, which goes into the Society Hill area. But anyway, the money that went to the people in Philadelphia, I'm sure was well earned and well used and really helped build and create industry in Philadelphia for many years. The Franklin Institute still uses a lot of that money, and they were also involved in judging various competitions over the years for the funding. So, do we have any questions, first of all? I'm not speaking much about his time in France or England or his travels around Europe because that would take another hour and a half to do. But I do have lots of books up here for people to look at of all sorts, from these Franklin and Women to The Way to Wealth to Franklin and Food. And yeah.
I had a question. His museum in Philadelphia.
That wasn't his, it was just named after him,
Just
right?
named,
Yeah.
but his house where he lived.
Oh, and that, yes, that is his museum, yeah.
That was part of the original. Where
That's right.
that was very interesting.
Yeah, they didn't want to build another building. Franklin sort of had a thing against putting up all these buildings. So a famous architect, what was his name, sure? Venturi. How many of you have heard of Robert Venturi? He's a well-known architect. He wrote a book called Learning from Las Vegas, actually. But anyway, instead of putting up another building, he just did the outline in steel of Franklin's house. And you could look down and see the privy pits and the basement of the house. And I thought that was pretty clever. And so that's something people should get to see if they visit Philadelphia. He had many other houses. He had a house in the country in New Jersey, and of course his house in England that he stayed at, Craven Street, has been turned into a museum in London. Should you go to London, you're welcome to visit that place. And that's where he met Polly, who was the landlady's daughter, who he brought to Philadelphia, and she married a notable physician and became an important part of the Philadelphia scientific ladies circle, if you will, in the late 18th century. She was at Franklin's bedside when he passed away, and I think I mentioned before how old he was, but who knows how old he was when he passed? Who remembers? Close, 84. That's pretty incredible. Pretty incredible. And he was very much concerned also about his fellow craftsmen and the occupational hazards. Somebody wrote a book called Dying to Work, and in that they look at the various 18th century problems with the metals and the smoke and chemicals used. And Franklin was very much concerned, especially with lead poisoning, with which he said plumbers and printers would have to deal with all the time. Of course, that's why he had his younger apprentices do that work, or maybe they did wear gloves, but he made sure that he did plenty of printing and typesetting, but that was a major problem in the day. This map, by the way, is an original. It's a 1795 map of Pennsylvania that shows what it looked like in that period. Now, how many of you were aware of the various land claims in Pennsylvania? There were claims on, Delaware was part of Pennsylvania at the time. They broke off in 1796. Maryland had claims on Pennsylvania too. So what did they do to deal with the land claims of Maryland? Who did they call in? What's that? That's right, Mason and Dixon. And so the Philosophical Society was the organization that brought them over to settle these land claims. But later, there were claims on Virginia's western frontier that had to be resolved too. But the bigger one was something called the Susquehanna Company. Has anyone ever heard of the Susquehanna Company? Well, this big blue section, for the most part, was what the Connecticut travelers, settlers who invaded Pennsylvania before the Revolution claimed. They came down, they set up an area around Wilkes-Barre and killed a number of Pennsylvania settlers. They also killed a number of Indians, but there was all kinds of intermittent warfare with all kinds of people because of these Connecticut settlers. During the Revolution, hostilities ceased, and Franklin comes back from France, and he was very concerned with dealing with the Pennamite War. So the first act that the Congressional Assembly took care of was saying that Pennsylvania had the right to the land and not Connecticut. But the Connecticut settlers wanted to go all the way across the Western Reserve, and they wanted to go all the way west, bringing their ideas, and primarily, I would say, that just Puritan ethic. Pennsylvania, of course, was a very diverse kind of place, and that wasn't something you could say about most other places, certainly not New England. It might be diverse in ideas in some ways, but not in welcoming people. And Franklin believed that, he said, anyone that comes to Philadelphia or Pennsylvania should be able to stand up and give their views of the world, their philosophies, even if what did he call him? The emir of Baghdad, not Baghdad, of Constantinople came to Pennsylvania. He should be able to stand up and talk about his ideas. So that was something Franklin was very much interested in. He also supported the ideas of Tom Paine, who, as you know, was an important pamphleteer and resident of Philadelphia, and winds up in New York. Now, I didn't say much about Franklin and his almanacs. And how many of you have ever read anything from the Poor Richard's Almanacs? Just show of hands. Anybody? You know some of the sayings. Well, okay, some of these sayings were illustrated, taken from the almanac, and called the Franklin Maxims. We had these in the show. I can you young fellow back there, you can come over here. Why don't you come over here if you want to see these? What's that? Keep them over there? Okay, well, all right. Sit on that chair back there. You can see these things. He can see them from there, okay. Oh, come up, you can come up to me and you want to come up and read the sayings? Okay, well, this one says, love neighbor, yet pull not down your hedge. And what would we say about that today? How would you put that in modern terms? What do you think? No? That's right. So these things have been reused and redone in many ways. Here's another one. Glass, china, and reputations are easily cracked. In rivers and bad governments, the lightest things swim at the top. And that one we've used in a number of places, and it still holds its power today. I think it's kind of an interesting piece. Fish and visitors smell after how many days? How many days we know? There you go. You got it. Beware of little expenses. A small leak will sink a great ship. So he was always concerned about balancing the books and taking care of business, so to speak. He was very good at that. He that lieth down with dogs shall rise up with fleas. That's a good one. Of course, now we have what do we have? The ticks. Beware of that. That was something. I don't know. There was a theory, actually, that in the 18th century or before, some of the madness going on in New England was caused by ticks. Lyme disease was caused by ticks biting some of the inhabitants, the skirts. So maybe that's a theory. It's kind of interesting, but who knows? You cannot pluck roses without fear of thorns. Okay, that's a good one. And you who seem to be really. That's sort of a philosophical. That's kind of a nice one. Be yourself. You see a balloon here. Has anyone ever gone up in a balloon? Franklin was very much interested in that. Of course, we know about the lightning rods, and we know about the glasses, and we know about electrical machines. But he was a big fan of ballooning. And in one of the sketches we have at the library, we have a balloon propelled by geese that go around, fly in this circular form, and create enough lift to bring the balloon off the ground. I don't know about that. That's a little. Yeah.
That would be extremely noisy.
The what?
Very noisy.
Noisy? It could be noisy. Well, if they were high enough up, you wouldn't hear them. You would hear them coming. That would be good. You'd hear quacks. That's more than we can say about some planes, some other balloons. So I think that's about it for the Franklin Maxims that Sherry designed and were used in various exhibits. I have a lot of things up here for you to look at. You're welcome to look at the map. And of course, as I said, you're welcome to go online and do research on Franklin. Young man, what would you want to know about relating to Franklin?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay, well. You can, what we did before actually in Clark Summit, does anyone know where Clark Summit is up near Scranton? Well, we had a bunch of students submit maxims. They took the ideas, the sayings, and drew the maxims, and we gave them prizes at the Dick's Sporting Goods. That would be something you could do, Teresa. Be fun. And we don't say one is better than the other, but there were different age groups, and it was a lot of fun.
You had a question?
Yes.
I recently saw the film The Great Awakening.
Yes.
Have you seen that?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
I like that a lot. And Franklin, I guess he would be a believer in the Ten Commandments, basically. He thought all religion had their purpose, and he said, you know what's good, what's right, and what's wrong. He printed George Whitfield's essays and met with Whitfield. He was very much impressed with Whitfield's ability to speak. That's something Franklin was very good with. He didn't feel comfortable speaking, either because maybe we don't know what his accent was exactly, or his teeth weren't very good, we know that. And among certain people in Paris or London, upper class people and the like, he might have felt very self-conscious. So he was also a better listener in some ways and liked to write about that. But The Great Awakening, I thought, was a very interesting movie. And it was filmed here, and I wondered last week, I asked people how many had seen it. Had anyone in this group seen it? And what do you think of it?
I was impressed. I mean, I really didn't know much about either of them.
Uh-huh.
So to see how their paths crossed,
Yeah.
I thought was just a really interesting dynamic.
The one thing that I didn't know, and I don't think Franklin knew that much about, Whitfield's, well, I guess he did, Whitfield's home or church in Georgia was full of slaves, young slaves. And Franklin later, he did have 2 slaves that he freed. One ran away, he didn't bother to go after him. But I think he was a little wary about incorporating slavery. Franklin actually believed that with the maple syrup, you could do away with slavery. How would that happen? How do you think you would be able to do away with slavery with the use of maple syrup?
Replace white sugar.
Well, yeah, that's right. You wouldn't need the Caribbean. You could because people didn't eat the amount of sugar then that they do now, and there were a lot more maple syrup around. Of course, the Native Americans knew about that too.
If you switch the white sugar for maple syrup, then someone is just going to use the slaves to make the maple syrup instead of the cane sugar.
Well, I don't think so, because the maple syrup farmers, well, they might hire people, but I don't think they'd make them slaves. But yeah, the sugar, but they won't need as many people. Of course, maple syrup is, in this North Country up here where they're drilling for natural gas, there was a big case. They took a nice maple syrup farm, and they paid the gentleman to drill on his land, but they cut a lot of his maple trees down, and it was a big lawsuit which he won. So here's another case of using your resources. Natural gas, well, I don't know whether you're for it or against it, but it's something we have a lot of in Pennsylvania, and Franklin actually was looking at those kinds of resources too. He knew about the mill or the mine out here in Warwick, which we've been to the outside of the mine, but it was a lead and what other things did they mine there? Resources. It wasn't coal. It was a mineral mine. But anyway, he realized Pennsylvania had these resources then, and certainly had a lot more resources today that he didn't know about. And so that's why we're sort of the Commonwealth. We have these things, and people are being trained for all kinds of industries in rural areas, and some of that is being promoted by the Penn State group in the technology school out of Williamsport. So, yeah. And of course, Williamsport in itself was one of the richest cities in the areas in the country. What did they have out there? And of course, we no longer, I don't know why we import all this wood from Canada, I don't know, but people never had a problem in Pennsylvania finding good wood. That was one of the reasons I think the Connecticut people thought they could come across, take the things and resources, and there are a lot of resources up here. There's the coal country and scoop Pennsylvania, but that was the first act to prevent them from doing that. So I welcome you to look at these things or ask me any questions. It's about 2 o'clock. I may have spoken more than I should have spoken.
Can you say anything about the relationship between Franklin and another printer named Christopher Sowell?
Yeah.
I
There-
understand there was some tension.
There was tension. That was early on. And Franklin realized he went away to England for a while, for several years, to learn, become a better printer, he was a great networker, and that was what you had to do. Not everyone maybe was that good a networker, but he picked up certain skills, certain contracts, and of course, for many years, the colonies relied on English law and whatever, so Franklin had these contracts to do that. Sauer printed in German, didn't he? And so that was a real contest. We talk about multilingual America today. Well, Franklin was concerned with that kind of thing as well. He didn't mind people speaking other languages, and they did, or not even speaking, well, he wanted them to be literate, but he wanted to make sure English was the predominant language. And when Franklin and Marshall started, he suggested that everyone had to learn English, because I think at the time you had the choice of not learning English. And he was also being scooped by other German printers in Ephrata. And you know about the cloisters, and they did some fine printing. He did try to network with that Peter Miller, as I mentioned, who helped subcontract some of his printing. But Sauer, yeah, we can look into that. You go online and look at the correspondence or the commentary about Franklin and Sauer. But of course, we went out. Although, how many people here in this central Pennsylvania area still speak or understand German? What would you say? 20%? 30%?
Probably zero.
No.
A lot
Well-
of them understand Pennsylvania Dutch, but not true German.
Well, we'll count that as a dialect. Let's count it as dialect. Now, Robin, you studied German, and tell me, what percentage of people do you think in the area, and I said the area, let's say from York to Lebanon or Lebanon County, Lancaster?
That's hard to say, but in the 1800s, you had lots of publications in German. In the 1700s, there were many tombstones, even in this area in German. And German was very popular until it started to fade in World War I, and by World War II.
Yeah.
If you've ever heard the song "Away in a Manger," has two tunes, because during World War I, they decided that Luther had written the song, but he hadn't. And since it was German, they didn't want to sing it, but they liked the song, so they made up a new melody. So today there are two melodies for that song, and that is why.
Well, one thing I think Franklin appreciated about the Germans is they're pacifist, although it's hard when you're fighting on the frontier, trying to raise troops for a militia. But I didn't realize the Anabaptists were, among the Anabaptists, I'm no scholar of religious history, but the Brethren, the Quakers, the Mennonites, the Amish, who else? The Moravians, I think were on. Well, that's, yeah. So I think he really appreciated that. And of course, he often said, there's no bad peace or a good war. And he saw that. He thought, well, you had to outsmart the opposition, but and use guerrilla warfare, of course, in America, which we did. And also, he was very much supportive of Native American ideas, too. He liked the idea of the Iroquois Confederation. Have you looked much at the Indians in Pennsylvania, my friend?
Yeah.
And I learned last week that the Indians here were not, well, they weren't on great terms with what group is it? The Susquehanna. So who knew that? I mean, of course, during the Revolution, some tribes, it was only, I think, the Oneida, of the Iroquois sided with the Americans against and the French against the English. And so today, if you go to the Revolution Museum in Philadelphia, you'll see many, many exhibits on the Oneidas, but not as many, or positive exhibits on the Oneidas. And I wanted to visit those places that we heard about last week and learn more about that. So anyway, are there any other questions or thoughts or ideas? I appreciate your coming out and bearing with me, and thank you, Robin, for your technology support.
Thank you, Roy. You really are an expert on Benjamin Franklin, and I know he welcomes you to come up, and I'm sure Roy would love to talk to you about anything. Yes. Oh, yeah. Okay. So June 10th, Nelson Polite is coming back with, and I said I'll forget her name again, Kavanaugh, Sylvia Kavanaugh, and they're going to be talking about. Yeah, no, they were good, and she's good too. And then Michael Harris, the author, is coming on June 17th. And then June 24th, we have the mayor of Elizabethtown, Phil Clark, coming. And then I'll be closing it out on July 1st. I can't believe that we only have 4 more sessions left. But stay tuned. If you enjoy this, we love doing it, and we'll plan more. And we welcome your feedback too. So there are evaluations over there, and